Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something fascinating, a
Yeah.
little bit hidden.
Right.
Ancient religions and the roles of women.
Yeah.
Things were different way back then,
Mm-hmm.
but like how different? Get ready to have some assumptions challenged.
I like it.
You gave us excerpts from Merlin Stone's When God Was a Woman and Robert Graves' The White Goddess.
Yes.
Two books that really dig into the archaeology and mythology
That's
of
interesting.
societies where female deities weren't just worshipped,
Yeah.
they reigned supreme.
It's incredible how much this period of history, even though it laid the groundwork for so much of our social structure and cultural inheritance,
Yeah.
just gets overlooked.
Right, like we think we know about the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
but these sources suggest the timeline is way,
Yeah.
way off.
Exactly. The Neolithic period,
Okay.
roughly 7,000 BC to 500 AD,
Wow.
is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Some scholars even trace this worship back to the Upper Paleolithic age,
Wow.
around 25,000 BC.
Wow. Now, to
Uh,
put that in perspective,
Yeah.
the events described in the Bible as in the beginning actually took place much later.
So we're talking about a belief system that predates many of the world's major religions.
Absolutely.
That's huge GE.
It is.
What was at the heart of these religions?
It all centered around the great goddess,
Okay.
often called the divine ancestress.
Okay.
Her worship and her power were widespread from Sumer and Babylon to ancient Anatolia,
Okay.
modern-day Turkey,
Wow.
even into Crete and Mycenaean Greece.
Okay, so it wasn't just a small localized thing.
Mhm.
This was a dominant belief system across a huge chunk of the world. Huge. But how did the worship of a female deity actually play out in these societies? I
Right.
mean, did women hold the power?
This is where it gets really interesting,
Okay.
and where the idea of matriarchy comes into play.
All right.
Now, the existence of true matriarchal societies is still debated by scholars.
Right.
It's important to acknowledge that
But Stone and Graves offer compelling evidence of a social order, unlike the male-dominated ones we're used to.
let's dig into that.
Okay.
What kind of evidence are we talking about?
Stone, in When God Was a Woman, points out that early societies, without a scientific understanding of how paternity worked,
Yeah.
may have naturally leaned towards matriarchal structures.
Interesting.
She highlights areas like Crete and Lycia where inheritance passed through the female line.
Wow. So a completely different way of thinking about family and lineage.
Absolutely. It challenges our assumptions about what's natural when it comes to power structures, doesn't it?
It really does.
And in The White Goddess, Graves uses the example of Hercules. Yes, that Hercules.
Right.
Performing labors for the goddess Artemis in Crete to illustrate how matriarchal customs may have persisted.
So even legendary heroes were answering to female deities.
It's true.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But beyond inheritance, how did women's lives differ in these goddess-worshipping societies, like on a
Right.
day-to-day basis?
Well, the evidence suggests they had way more autonomy.
Okay.
They could own property, inherit, engage in trade.
Right.
Things often denied to women in later patriarchal societies.
Right.
They were priestesses, leaders.
Okay.
Some even speculate they held roles similar to rulers.
Okay, so we're not just talking about a symbolic shift here,
Yeah.
but a real difference in how power was structured
Right.
and who benefited from it.
Exactly.
If these female-centric societies were so widespread,
Yeah.
what happened? How did the system give way to male-dominated religions?
The arrival of Indo-European tribes around 3400, 3200 BC marks a turning point.
Okay.
These tribes brought their own male gods.
Right.
And this is where we see a gradual shift in the balance of power.
Gradual, so not an overnight revolution.
Right. It's more complex than a single battle where the goddess is defeated.
Yeah,
It was a slow process, like a cultural tide coming in.
I see.
For example, in Sumer, the goddess Inanna gradually loses some of her power to the god Enlil. Over in Anatolia, the Hittites introduce a male storm god who shares power with the existing sun goddess of Arena.
Interesting.
And when the Hebrews arrived in Canaan, their god Yahweh presented another challenge to these female-centric religions.
So it's more like a slow merging of beliefs than a clean break?
Yeah, you could say that.
Did that make the transition easier?
Not necessarily.
Wow.
Stone points out that this shift wasn't just about religion, it was about political power.
Right.
The arrival of new tribes and their male gods often coincided with changes in the social and political landscape. Think about it. If you're coming in and want to establish your dominance,
Yeah,
you've got to dismantle the existing power structure.
right.
And what's more powerful than religion?
It's easier to take control if you can control the the narrative,
Absolutely.
control what people believe.
Yes.
So as these new tribes rose in power, their gods rose with them.
Mm-hmm.
Did the old ways just disappear?
Unfortunately, it wasn't always a peaceful merging of beliefs. The sources we're looking at detail how various tactics were used to suppress the worship of female deities
Yeah?
and elevate the new male gods.
What kind of tactics are we talking about? How do you erase a belief system that's been around for centuries, if not millennia?
One method was straight-up demonization.
Okay.
Stone cites W.F. Albright, a well-known archaeologist, who described goddess worship as orgiastic nature worship, sensuous nudity, and gross mythology.
Right.
Basically painting it as immoral and primitive compared to the newer religions.
Oh, the old our way is civilized, your way is barbaric argument.
Exact power move.
Exactly. And it wasn't just academics.
Okay.
The Hebrew prophets, for instance, condemned the Canaanites' worship of female deities like Ashtoreth.
So you have this clash of cultures and religions, with the new guard trying to discredit the old to solidify their own power.
Yes.
But it wasn't just about words, was it?
Not at all.
Okay.
The shift played out in tangible ways, too.
Now, think about the increasingly restrictive laws surrounding women's sexuality and freedom in Hebrew society as Yahweh rose in prominence.
Okay.
Or the biblical portrayals of Eve and Jezebel.
Right.
Classic examples of how female figures are often used as cautionary tales against the supposed dangers of female power and independence.
So it's all connected.
It is.
The suppression of the goddess went hand in hand with restricting women's roles and freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pattern we see repeated throughout history, unfortunately.
Unfortunately true.
But if these efforts were so widespread and effective,
Yeah.
how do we even know about the goddess?
Right.
I mean, did any trace of this belief system survive?
That's the amazing thing. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle where some pieces were deliberately thrown away.
Right.
But Stone does a fantastic job digging deeper.
Oh.
For example, she talks about this fascinating account of the symbolic murder of the goddess in Sumerian mythology.
Symbolic murder.
Yeah.
That sounds intense.
It is.
What happened?
Well, Stone suggests this myth reflects the arrival of a new group, possibly the Ubaidians, who brought the worship of Enlil with them.
Okay.
And the story itself recounts how Inanna loses control over vital things like agriculture and water,
Right.
which then become associated with Enlil.
So it's almost like a mythologized record of a cultural clash.
Yeah.
Where the feminine is literally being stripped of its power and it's being handed over to the masculine.
Exactly. And it wasn't an isolated incident.
Right.
Stone also talks about the arrival of the Indo-European Luwians in Anatolia around 2300 BC.
Okay.
They brought destruction and their own male-centric pantheon, which slowly blended with the existing worship of the Hessian goddess.
Man, it's interesting how often these cultural shifts involve violence.
Yeah.
Like, you don't just get to impose your beliefs, you often have to literally fight for them.
It's a recurring pattern, isn't it?
It is.
And Stone doesn't shy away from the fact that suppressing goddess worship often went hand in hand with grabbing political control and resources, especially land.
Which makes sense.
Right.
If you want to establish your own dominance, you have to tear down what was there before, both physically and in terms of belief systems.
It's true.
And this brings us to the story of Abraham,
Okay.
which I have to admit I'm really curious to hear your take on through this lens.
Right. It's a pivotal story.
It is.
Stone dives into Abraham's background and suggests he might have had ties to the Hurrian people,
Okay.
who were prominent in the region that became the kingdom of Mitanni.
Right.
What's interesting is that the Hurrians had their own gods,
Oh, yeah.
including female deities.
So Abraham's background might be more religiously diverse than traditionally portrayed?
Exactly. It challenges the assumption of a strict patriarchal starting point.
Interesting.
But here's where it gets even more intriguing.
Okay.
Stone explores the possibility that Moses,
Yeah.
the central figure in the Exodus story,
Right.
might have been influenced by the Hittites and Hurrians.
Wait, are you saying that Moses, the lawgiver himself,
Yes.
could have been exposed to traditions that included goddess worship?
It's possible.
That changes things.
Right.
Yeah.
Stone points out that Moses was raised in the Egyptian court
Right.
during a time when Egypt was interacting with these other cultures.
Okay.
She even suggests his name might be related to Egyptian names common in that era.
Wow.
It challenges our understanding of where the Hebrew faith came from.
That's a lot to process.
It is.
So you're suggesting that the Hebrew religion as it developed
Yeah.
wasn't just this single divinely revealed thing,
Right.
but a blend of influences.
Possibly.
That some of those influences might have celebrated the feminine divine.
It's definitely a different picture than the traditional narrative.
It is.
And if we look at the laws Moses brought down from Mount Sinai,
Okay.
we see a definite shift towards patriarchy.
Okay.
These laws are crystal clear in establishing a male-dominated social structure.
So while the societies that worship the goddess had more egalitarian structures,
We think so.
the rise of Yahweh happened alongside a system that put men firmly in control.
Exactly.
Wow.
Stone goes into detail about how these new laws limited women's rights and freedoms,
Yeah.
especially when it came to sexuality, inheritance, and divorce.
Right.
It's a stark example of how religion can be used to justify and uphold social hierarchies.
And again, we see those patterns repeating throughout history. It's almost like a playbook.
It is.
But Stone also analyzes the stories of Eve and Jezebel,
Right.
which feels relevant here.
It's so important
Yeah.
because these stories are presented as cautionary tales.
Right.
Warnings about the dangers of female power and independence.
Right.
Think about the impact that has on how we view women who challenge authority.
It's like those stories, whether we realize it or not,
Yeah.
feed into this idea that a woman's place is to be subservient.
Right.
That stepping out of line has dire consequences.
Right.
And that kind of messaging doesn't just disappear, does it?
Not at all.
Right.
And its suppression of the feminine isn't unique to the Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
Stone also looks at how the ancient Greeks demonized and marginalized their goddesses.
Right.
Think Medusa,
Right.
the terrifying Gorgon with snakes for hair. Stone suggests she might represent a twisted version of a once revered goddess.
That's such a powerful image.
It is.
This idea that a figure who was once worshipped is transformed into something to be feared. It's tragic, but it also highlights how deeply ingrained these patterns are.
Yeah.
You take something powerful, you twist it into something monstrous,
Right.
and then you use that to justify controlling it.
It's a recurring theme, isn't it?
It really is.
But here's the thing. Even with all this effort to silence her, the goddess never truly vanished.
Wow, okay.
She persisted, just in different forms,
Okay.
hiding in plain sight in mythology, folklore,
Okay.
even in the way we use language. It's like a secret code whispering to us through the ages.
A code that reveals a whole different side to history, right?
Exactly.
And Stone gives us the tools to start deciphering it.
She does.
But her book isn't the only one we have.
Right.
How does Robert Graves approach this idea of the goddess?
So
How does his work, The White Goddess, build upon what we've discussed so far?
Graves takes a different approach,
Okay.
focusing more on the poetic and mythological side of things.
Okay.
He presents this idea of a single overarching goddess archetype, the white goddess,
Okay.
who embodies the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth.
So while Stone digs into the archaeological and historical evidence,
Right.
Graves is all about the myths, the symbols, the stories we tell ourselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
For Graves, the white goddess is the source of all poetic inspiration.
Interesting.
She's the muse whispering to artists and writers throughout history.
It's a beautiful idea.
It is.
So creativity itself is rooted in this feminine principle.
That's what Graves argues. He connects this white goddess archetype to figures from Celtic mythology,
Okay.
like the Welsh Ceridwen and the Irish Brigid.
Right.
We've already touched on them briefly,
Yeah.
but they're central to his theory.
They seem to represent the enduring presence of the goddess. These figures who survived even when their worship was driven underground.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ceridwen, for example, is this powerful figure associated with transformation and rebirth.
Okay.
She's often depicted as a hag or a sow,
Right.
representing the darker, more primal aspects of the feminine.
So not just beauty and light,
Right.
but also the raw, untamed power of nature.
Exactly.
Interesting.
It's about acknowledging the full spectrum of feminine power.
Okay.
On the other hand, you have Brigid,
Right.
who's associated with healing, poetry, and even blacksmithing.
Wow.
She embodies the nurturing, creative aspects of the goddess.
It's interesting how different cultures use different faces, different aspects to represent this larger archetype. It speaks to how universal this idea of a feminine divine truly is.
And that's precisely what Graves argues.
Okay.
He sees these figures, along with countless others from different cultures and mythologies,
Right.
as pointing back to this single overarching archetype of the white goddess.
So it's not about one specific goddess, but this overarching archetype that unites them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he finds her echoes everywhere.
Does he really?
He looks at Irish legends, too, seeing connections to the white goddess in figures like the Morrigan, this badass war goddess linked to fate and prophecy.
It's amazing how these ancient myths, even across different cultures, all seem to be drawing from a similar wellspring of inspiration.
Right, yeah. And for Graves, this universality points to something ancient and primal about the white goddess. She's not just a Celtic thing, but a universal symbol of the feminine principle that transcends any one culture's borders.
It's almost like underneath all the differences, humans have been grappling with these same big ideas, these same archetypes, for as long as we've been telling stories.
It's true.
And Graves is urging us to remember those stories, to reconnect with those deeper truths.
You've got it.
Yeah.
And he argues that suppressing the goddess, cutting ourselves off from that source, has been detrimental to Western civilization. He wants us to reclaim that connection, to reawaken the poetic and spiritual power of the white goddess within us all.
That's a powerful message.
It is.
And one that feels incredibly relevant right now, wouldn't you say?
I would.
It's like in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and uncertain, we're being called to tap into those ancient sources of wisdom and strength.
It's a call to action.
It is.
And it circles back to what we were discussing earlier about the cyclical nature of time. Just as the goddess was suppressed, she can reemerge.
And that resurgence starts with each of us, right?
It does.
With recognizing that those ancient forces are still present.
Still available to us if we know how to access them. So how do we do that?
How do we do that?
Yeah, what does Graves suggest?
He emphasizes immersing ourselves in nature. Really using our senses to experience the world around us. To reconnect with those primal rhythms we've been talking about.
So get off our phones, get outside, and remember what it feels like to be a part of the natural world. Not just an observer of it.
Exactly. He also encourages us to delve into mythology and folklore. To see those stories not just as entertainment, but as maps to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe.
So pay attention to the stories we tell, the symbols we use, the archetypes that resonate with us. Right?
And perhaps most importantly, Graves believed in the power of creation itself. He saw poetry in particular as a way to tap into that wellspring of inspiration embodied by the white goddess.
So by engaging in creative acts,
whether it's writing poetry, painting, dancing, whatever speaks to us, we're essentially communing with that ancient source.
That's the idea. It's about finding that connection to something larger than ourselves, something ancient and powerful, and allowing it to flow through us.
I love that. It's not just about studying the goddess. It's about embodying that energy, that creative force in our own lives.
Exactly. Both Stone and Graves, in their own ways, are inviting us to do just that. They're showing us that these ancient beliefs and practices weren't just some primitive stage we evolved out of. They hold wisdom that's still relevant, still potent, if we're willing to listen.
Wow. What an incredible deep dive this has been.
It has been.
You know, it makes you think, what if the suppression of the goddess had never happened? How different might our world look?
It's a good question.
It's a question that will stay with me.
It's a question worth pondering.
It is.
And maybe, just maybe, by reclaiming this ancient wisdom, by reawakening the goddess within each of us, we can start to create a different kind of future. One that's more balanced, more aligned with the rhythms of nature.
I love that vision. It's a reminder that we have the power to shape not just our understanding of the past, but also the course of our future.
I agree.
Thank you so much for taking us on this journey. It's been eye-opening.
The pleasure was all mine.
And for you listening, if this deep dive sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to check out the full texts of When God Was a Woman and The White Goddess. We'll have links in the show notes. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Graves describes her as this threefold deity, encompassing the maiden, the mother, and the crone. You see this triple goddess archetype across so many cultures and religions.
Oh, absolutely. Like a universal representation of feminine energy. What makes each aspect unique in Graves' view?
Well, the maiden represents youth, beauty, new beginnings. That spark of potential. The mother embodies fertility, nurturing, abundance. Think of the fullness of life. And then the crone, she's wisdom, age, the inevitability of death,
Right.
and the cyclical nature of time.
It's like the full circle of life.
Yes.
Encapsulated in these three figures.
Right.
And it's not just about a woman's lifespan, is it?
No.
It feels connected to the natural world, too.
You've hit on a key aspect of Graves' work.
Okay.
He directly links these phases to the seasons.
Okay.
The maiden is spring, the mother is summer, the crone is autumn and winter.
So the white goddess isn't some distant deity.
Right.
She's intertwined with the rhythms of nature, the very cycle of life, death, and rebirth we see all around us.
Exactly.
We talked earlier about how suppressing the goddess might have disconnected us from something vital.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is part of it.
It could.
Losing touch with that natural order.
That's a powerful connection to make.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of what Graves is saying.
Okay.
But he doesn't just talk about this archetype in a vacuum.
Okay.
He grounds it in specific traditions.
Right.
Particularly Celtic mythology.
And I know we touched on figures like Ceridwen and Bridget.
Yeah.
But what other myths and figures does he use to illustrate these ideas?
Sure.
Give us some more of those hidden connections.
Graves dives deep into the Welsh Mabinogion, this collection of ancient Celtic myths.
Right.
He believes these stories hold hidden meanings.
Okay.
Clues to understanding the white goddess.
So he's almost like a detective.
Yes.
Uncovering secret messages encoded in these ancient tales.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And one figure he focuses on is Blodwed.
Okay.
This woman created from flowers
Wow.
by the magician Gwydion.
Okay, that's just cool imagery right there.
It is.
What's the significance of a woman made of flowers?
For Graves, she's an embodiment of the white goddess. Specifically, the maiden aspect.
Okay.
Blodwed represents the beauty and fragility of nature,
Right.
and her story, which involves betrayal and transformation,
Okay.
reflects that cyclical nature of life, death, and renewal that's so central to Graves' theory.
It sounds like a classic myth.
It does.
Beauty, magic, tragedy.
Right.
But it's not just a sad story, it's pointing to something bigger.
Right.
Right.
And Graves doesn't stop there.
Okay.
He connects Blodwed to Rhiannon,
Okay.
a powerful figure from the Mabinogion,
Okay.
a horse goddess associated with sovereignty and the other world.
Wow.
It's like he's weaving together this tapestry showing how different figures embody different aspects of the white goddess.
So it's not about one specific goddess,
Right.
but this overarching archetype that unites them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he finds her echoes everywhere.
He does.
He looks at Irish legends too,
Oh,
seeing
neat.
connections to the white goddess in figures like the Morgan,
Yeah.
this badass war goddess linked to fate and prophecy.
It's amazing how these ancient myths, even across different cultures,
Yes.
all seem to be drawing from a similar wellspring of inspiration.
Right.
Yeah.
And for Graves, this universality points to something ancient and primal about the white goddess.
Okay.
She's not just a Celtic thing,
Right.
but a universal symbol of the feminine principle that transcends any one culture's borders.
It's almost like underneath all the differences, humans have been grappling with these same big ideas.
Right.
These same archetypes
Mm-hmm.
for as long as we've been telling stories.
It's true.
And Graves is urging us to remember those stories.
Yes.
To reconnect with those deeper truths.
You've got it.
Okay.
And he argues that suppressing the goddess,
Mm.
cutting ourselves off from that source,
Right.
has been detrimental to Western civilization.
Right.
He wants us to reclaim that connection,
Yes.
to reawaken the poetic and spiritual power of the white goddess within us all.
That's a powerful message, and one that feels incredibly relevant right now, wouldn't you say?
I would.
It's like, in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and uncertain,
Mm-hmm.
we're being called to tap into those ancient sources of wisdom and strength.
It's a call to action.
It is.
And it circles back to what we were discussing earlier about the cyclical nature of time.
Right.
Just as the goddess was suppressed, she can reemerge.
And that resurgence starts with each of us, right?
It does.
It's recognizing that those ancient forces are still present,
Mm-hmm.
still available to us if we know how to access them.
Right.
So how do we do that?
How do we do that?
Yeah, what does Graves suggest?
He emphasizes immersing ourselves in nature,
Okay.
really using our senses to experience the world around us, to reconnect with those primal rhythms we've been talking about.
So get off our phones, get outside,
Yeah.
and remember what it feels like to be a part of the natural world.
Yes.
Not just an observer of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He also encourages us to delve into mythology and folklore,
Right.
to see those stories not just as entertainment, but as maps to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe.
So pay attention to the stories we tell.
Yes.
The symbols we use. The archetypes that resonate with us.
Yes.
Right.
And perhaps most importantly, Graves believed in the power of creation itself.
Okay.
He saw poetry, in particular, as a way to tap into that wellspring of inspiration embodied by the white goddess.
So by engaging in creative acts, whether it's writing poetry, painting, dancing, whatever speaks to us, we're essentially communing with that ancient source.
That's the idea.
Okay.
It's about finding that connection to something larger than ourselves, something ancient and powerful, and allowing it to flow through us.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's not just about studying the goddess. It's about embodying that energy. That creative force in our own lives.
Exactly. Both Stone and Graves, in their own ways, are inviting us to do just that. They're showing us that these ancient beliefs and practices weren't just some primitive stage we evolved out of. They hold wisdom that's still relevant, still potent, if we're willing to listen.
Wow, what an incredible deep dive this has been. It's really got me thinking.
Good.
Thank you so much for taking us on this journey. It's been eye-opening.
The pleasure was all mine.
And for you listening, if this deep dive sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to check out the full texts of When God Was a Woman and The White Goddess. We'll have links in the show notes. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.